Hey everybody, I just had to share a little bit of this beautiful Ligurian coastline with you. I am here in northern Italy, and a lot of people have had the experience of being able to tolerate gluten better when they come to Italy. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the top three myths about why that may or may not be true. So, first myth for people with migraine is this. I don't get a migraine when I eat gluten, so I don't have to worry about it. Okay, folks. So the reason that that is not true is because gluten isn't so much a trigger, meaning the last thing that happens before you got your migraine. Gluten contributes to chronic inflammation in your body. Okay. So there's a lot of uncertainty, I think, about what inflammation actually is. So have you ever had a cut and it got a little bit red around the edges? That's inflammation. Those are chemicals in your body that cause that redness, the tenderness, the heat around that wound. That's your immune system reacting to something. In that case, it's doing you a favor, right? It's helping you clean up that wound, make new tissue, and recover. That's your immune system doing its job. Well, what happens with gluten is your body is reacting to the gluten that you eat in the same way. You just don't see it because it's happening on the inside, right? So you can certainly get some symptoms from that, but a lot of times people don't. And it's really just like those tipping buckets at a kid's water park. They're sort of slowly filling up, filling up, filling up, filling up, and then something happens and the bucket tips over and you get a migraine. The problem isn't the last thing that made the bucket tip over. That's just the trigger. The problem is that the bucket filled up. Do you see what I'm saying? So I think that this issue is actually massively under-recognized. It's a much bigger problem for people with migraine than we think. So if you can't feel this process happening in your body and you don't necessarily get a migraine after you eat gluten, how do you know if it's even happening to you? Well, the best way to figure that out is through a new type of genetic testing called functional genomics. I just like to think of that as being a very practical, hands-on type of genetic testing that gives you actionable results that you can actually do something about. It's not about finding out if you have a risk for some rare condition. It's about, hey, what can I do in my daily life to improve my health and reduce the symptoms that I am getting from these underlying issues? So, with the type of testing that I do for the students in my courses, you can learn which type of genes you have that may increase your chance of celiac disease or gluten intolerance. Now, for celiac disease, of course, you can't eat gluten, period, ever. All kinds of wheat, Italian wheat, American wheat, ancient wheat, all the wheats have gliadin, which is the part of the protein that your immune system reacts to. So for people with celiac disease, gluten is always a known. But for people who are gluten intolerant, it can be a much more difficult thing to figure out, especially if you don't get an immediate reaction to it. So there are actually specific genes, they're called HLA genes, that determine your risk of being sensitive to gluten, of being gluten intolerant. And once you know that information about your body, then I think you can make a wise choice. All right, myth number two that I hear out there a lot. American wheat was hybridized after World War II, and it's because of these newer hybrid types of wheat that we have more difficulty tolerating the wheat that's grown in America. Well, it actually turns out that this is not entirely true. Let me show you this study. So, this study, comparative study on gluten protein composition of ancient and modern wheat species, tells us that actually it's the ancient species of wheat that are higher in gliadin, which is the part that we react to in the wheat. Now, these modern wheat species are actually the same in Italy and the United States. We tend to make pasta from durum wheat. It's called semolina flour. And common wheat is used more for making things like breads. And it's a softer kind of wheat. And in Italy, it's ground very, very, very fine. So they have a special name for that particular type of flour, but it's more related to how it's milled. It's not related to the properties of the wheat itself, which is what our body reacts to. So as you can see here, we can look at the gliadin content of different kinds of wheat. Einkorn and Emmer, which are typically thought of being ancient grains, are over here on the right. They're actually quite high in gliadin, which is the stuff that our body reacts to. And you'll see the common wheat over on the left is actually pretty low. Now, the other thing is that Italy actually imports its wheat from kind of all over the world at this point, so it's not entirely fair to say that the varieties that are used in Italy and grown in Italy are different from what's used everywhere else. I mean, we're all part of a global economy these days. And now I think that the reason some people get upset over this idea of hybridization is because it's a little confusing to figure out what's the difference between that and genetically modified. They are very different. So hybridization is really just a farmer kind of taking two wheat stalks and mating them and making a new kind. Now, I don't know how you mate wheat. If anybody watching this video knows how to do that, please drop it in the content. Genetic modification is a completely different thing. Now, we don't have GMO wheat in the United States, so we don't have to worry about that. We do have genetically modified corn and soy, and the reason that those were made is that they farmers wanted them to be resistant to Roundup. Now, the story about Roundup, which we'll get to a little bit more in a minute, but for the moment, basically what they did is make corn and soy, they changed the genetic structure of it so that Roundup would not kill it. So that they could spray that on the crops, the weeds would die, the crop would not, and that would therefore increase yields, feed more people, feed more animals, and do good things. All right, and that brings us to myth number 3. It's the glyphosate. Now, it is true that you cannot use Roundup in Italy as a desiccant. Okay, what does that mean? That just means they use it as a drying agent before harvest. So basically, right as the wheat is ready to be harvested, you spray glyphosate on it because it dries it out and it makes the harvest go better. I mean, maybe sounds like a bad idea to spray the poison on the food right before you eat it. I don't know. But anyway, that's how it is done in some parts of America, not all, but it is allowed here. It is not allowed in Italy. You can use glyphosate in other parts of farming here in Italy, just not right before you eat it, which does seem to make good sense. Now, I do want to point out that the intention with glyphosate was good. So glyphosate basically impacts a biochemical pathway that weeds have that we don't. So that's why people thought it was harmless for humans. Now, the problem is we've learned over time, of course, that it actually does impact human health quite significantly. In fact, Monsanto has paid out over $11 billion in settlements for people who got a certain type of cancer called non-Hodgkin's lymphoma from high levels of exposure to Roundup. And even if we don't have high levels of exposure, even low level exposure can still be harmful to the gut microbiome. Here is a study that confirmed the effect of glyphosate on the gut microbiome. I love this title, Separating the Empirical Wheat from the Pseudoscientific Chaff. Turns out it is harmful to the good bacteria that are in our guts. We have a combination of good bacteria and bad bacteria. If you wipe out the good bacteria, you get something called dysbiosis. Your gut doesn't work right. You get more symptoms at the time, but it also sets you up for this inflammation down the road, you know, that I was talking about with the pain chemicals filling up the tipping bucket. And that sets you up for a variety of health problems in addition to migraine. So at this point, you're probably wondering why I'm saying that it's not the glyphosate when it's so clear that glyphosate actually does harmful things to our health. But here's the thing, you can buy organic products in the United States, right? You can buy organic wheat bread, you can buy organic pasta. People still have reactions to those that they feel like they don't have here in Italy. Now, why is that? I think number one, it's very confusing to figure out if wheat is a problem for you in the first place, right? Unless you've had your genetic testing done, you're not going to know what your baseline predisposition for having trouble tolerating gluten is. You're trying to figure it out totally based on trial and error, looking at your symptoms as evidence of whether or not this is a health problem for you. And that's just not always right because there could be dozens of things going on for you under the surface at any one time, and you don't know what those are. And I think the other important thing to keep in mind is just when you're on vacation, you're on vacation. Life is less stressful, right? Of course, that's going to make your health better. We all know how bad stress is for us, and we know how little Americans vacation compared to the rest of the world. So during the times when we do, I think it's not surprising that our health gets better in so many different ways.